What's going on? Uh, just come back today from the Bahamas. I'm happy to be home. I miss my children, and I miss being home. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be home. I just wanted to give y'all an update on my experience in Bahamas. I also wanted to just touch on some things I've been meaning to do a video blog on. So I think I'm gonna just go and just do it all. So first and foremost, the Bahamas. A lot of interesting things happen in the Bahamas. Most interesting is the exchange. Of course, I was there, to presented at the Green Earth Festival. Um, so this is a good event. This is actually, what they're trying. The sister Rhonda, a founder of Seedlings Place. She definitely has a mission. She has a mission to further her community in terms of, well, herself, her community, her family, in terms of bringing this sort of information. But not only that, but providing, I guess, a way to put people who have specific services, specific items they like to sell. For example, just anything that has to do with nature, that has to do with healing and health. So, so I was happy to be a part of that, especially in the islands of Bahamas. I did not know, Bahamas consisted of over 700 islands. This is pretty amazing, and how close it was to Florida. So so the Bahamas is great. I definitely like the Bahamas. I mean, having traveled now to the different islands of the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, Antigua, Jamaica, Dominica. They all definitely have their pros and cons, their own personality. But most of all, at least what I wanted to share here was that class I did was phenomenal. It was great. People loved the food. They loved the information. I think I definitely went down there and made a difference in some people's lives, um, which is what it's all about. But it also made a difference for me and some things that I'm going to be changing, not only with myself but at my shop. Um, Specifically, I got a chance to really understand more about just the hybridization of foods. The hybrid foods. I mean, if you eat food, like, more than likely, it's probably hybrid. I mean, we very rarely eat indigenous foods that were in their true essence, their true state, that nature truly is involved with. I mean, obviously, farming and farming techniques it's a double-edged sword, because hybrid foods are not all bad, I would say. I mean, certainly nutritionally they have been compromised due to the fact that, and you have hybrid foods for different reasons. Again, hybrid foods have been around for a very long time. Let's make mention of that. But the main sponsor for the Green Earth Festival was a center shop known as New Life, and it's in Nassau, Bahamas. And the New Life um, Center is a center that was founded, and the philosophy and principles are based on Dr. Sebi's teachings. Now, I've heard a lot about Dr. Sebi over the years. I've never, um, good and bad. I've never. Again, I feel like his philosophy. One thing, one brother from New York City had told me when Dr. Sebi first reached the U.S. was the fact that he had angered a lot of vegetarians because he said no carrots, no colonics, and no soy. And I'm pretty much in line with all three of those. I'm definitely not into carrots. Can you benefit from carrots? Yeah, you can benefit from carrots because, I mean, a lot of times for most people, the alternative is something a lot worse than carrot juice. And no colonics. I feel like your colon starts here, right at the beginning of where you begin to eat, whereas where your issues begin. So if your issues begin at your mouth, your healing has to begin at your mouth. So definitely no colonics. Now I will add that colonics. I think colonics have a use for someone that is just like really fresh and new to fasting in this lifestyle, but certainly is not like a regular thing that you should do. You should make fasting a regular thing and let your colon do its own in-house cleaning. But again, the colon starts here, so if you're just getting the end of your colon, which is your large intestines, then you're not really. Again, it's less than ideal. And then, of course, no soy. Soy is not a product of nature, no doubt about that, and it has been destructive. I've seen it's one thing to read the research, but to see things with your own eyes, it's affected my children. Um, I've seen the damage it can do to not only the youth and people I know, vegetarian families and what have you, but also with our elder vegetarians. I've seen our elder vegetarians fall victim to years of eating predominantly heavy soy diet. So I'm down with Sebi for the most part. So at New Life, I got to meet some very passionate, bros who were really passionate about health. So much so, I mean, like when I first arrived, they like, basically took me to the back room and was like, okay, we not about using these hybrid foods. So no garlic, no this, no that, no that. I mean, it was like I felt like I was, what do they call when the police some interrogation, and so they were like, had to tell me. I mean, I was cool and relaxed as always, but it was like, I mean, relax. I guess they were just trying to fill me out. They didn't know where I was coming from. Obviously, I do use I do use some hybrid foods. I didn't, in terms of using garlic and broccoli, cauliflower. Again, they begin to educate me on these foods and how these foods are like, for example, broccoli and cauliflower are derivations from wild kale. So, again, if you eat a lot of hybrid foods, it is definitely missing the vital electrics, some of the cellular nutrition, as they like to say. Um, uh, again, the food has certainly, like broccoli. I mean, you won't necessarily find broccoli growing wild in nature. You won't find cauliflower growing wild in nature. So some of these things are certainly less than ideal to eat. Yes, absolutely. Can you benefit? The question I always is, can you benefit from eating broccoli? Yes. Can you benefit from eating cauliflower? Yes. So you can benefit from eating these foods. It's just that balance. That's one thing I talked about in my class. In terms of anytime I ask a question of myself, answer is always balance. So But nonetheless, I got a chance to learn. So I got a chance to try some of the herbal remedies. Um, so that was interesting. Very powerful stuff. I got introduced to some indigenous foods growing there. I mean, one mission that I had, and one mission that I'm sharing with you, is that regardless of where you're at, you gotta connect with local food. You know, that is probably the key thing that I also learned from going there. Upon arriving there, I was taken to basically a local grocery store, and all of the food, all of the produce there was from the U.S. So I was less than thrilled about my selection, but being there a week, I definitely got a chance. And one of the most amazing experiences of my life, was basically the day of my class. This The sister who was taking me to get the food, we were basically almost foraging, the city of Nassau for food, and I will never forget. We just saw uh, um, just a just wild spinach vines just growing like along the side of the road. It was just like I've never thought I would see spinach growing wild. I didn't even know spinach grew wild. So actually, and we ended up using, that was the very spinach that we used for the class. So that was amazing. You know, Also, very exciting for me was the fact that I was able to, for the very first time, climb a coconut tree and get coconuts fresh off the tree. So I was so geeked. I was like a kid. I was so like overjoyed, with my own personal. It was like that was something on my bucket list that, as the self-professed coconut king, that of course the coconut king should be able to, if he had to, climb the tree. Again, no. I had my machete and one of my pants loop. So as I climbed the tree, I was able to reach for my machete and knock down a bundle of coconuts. So this was very exciting. Um, I had a few, you can't probably see them, but it's healing. Scratches on my arms, from hugging the tree. You have to like hug the tree and then use your feet to kind of itch, propel your way up the tree. So very exciting for me. Again, something I've always, it was one of my dreams actually. So it was nice. It was really, I was determined. So it happened. So that was exciting. So I was able to drink the coconut like right off the tree, and that was like, wow. It was like bliss. Just pure, just bliss. So that was exciting. We also, went to some local farms, and or it's oftentimes when you're in a Caribbean place like that, the best food is the local community selling food on the side of the road. Whether it's coconuts, uh, there was Guinnop. We had some Guinnop. Mangoes was coming in, so I was able to get some nice mangoes. Uh, what else did we get? Um, just onion and bell pepper. Uh, just all the things that we use for the class. It was just great. They had watermelon. Watermelon was delicious. Uh, a bummer, I might add. I also did collect some wild growing noni, which I'm guilty. I tried to smuggle back into the U.S. Of course, that was not on the. They do have a list. If you're coming into the U.S. with fruits, there is a list of quote unquote safe fruits, but noni is not one of those. So unfortunately, it was a real huge bummer. I'm still a little upset that I was not able to bring the noni. I was planning on making my own noni juice. Not this time. Um, so yeah, so the class went well. You know, the spinach, the coconuts was a definite highlight. You know, just driving. Say, oh, there's some spinach. Let's get it. So, I mean, again, coming from the U.S. and even buying organic and all that stuff is like, there's another level. You know, just finding your food and like, boom, it's free. so, so that's really the way to go. But if you're in a city like myself, you know, going to your local farmers markets, other than finding wild food, is the next best thing. So, but back to New Life and Dr. Sebi. Um, you know, again, in terms of the uh, hybrid foods, I mean, one thing I want to eliminate. I do use corn. I use a frozen corn in my shop. I mean, we don't cook it. It's technically not raw. So I made the decision on the trip that I'm not going to use corn. I did find out that corn was derived from an ancient plant that looks nothing like corn. Even the multicolored corn that Native Americans grew is not the original version of corn. It was actually something that looked uh, it looked interesting, but it was something that the ancient Mayans and the Aztecs ate, but they may have called it corn, but it definitely is not the yellow and white corn that we know today. Um, Even the multicolored corn, I remember the last time I was at the farmer's market, I had asked one of the farmers I wanted to taste the multicolored corn because according to them it's like, oh, you don't want to eat that, it's not sweet. It's like, exactly. I mean, eating sweet food all the time is the problem. I mean, again, as I talk in my classes, it's like the food that has the most flavor is the food that's less sweet, the food that is bitter. You know, all of our spices that give our food so much flavor and so much energy are bitter, usually bitter or hot or sour. You know, the last thing that they are sweet or salty. Uh, so again, I would like to taste, the indigenous corn. Um, I'm really into that. So maybe one day. So yeah, so it was a huge education. So corn, definitely. Garlic, our garlic kale is a very popular dish. I'm on the fence with garlic. I mean, I know garlic is, you know, garlic has the ability to heal, but garlic, also, I mean, once you're clean, you don't really have a taste for garlic, and garlic is not really necessary. Um, especially if you're eating raw foods for some years, you really don't have a taste for garlic. I mean, if I was making food for myself and not for the public, I wouldn't be putting garlic in my food. I just wouldn't find a need. But really, a lot of food. I mean, just about every food that you find on a farm has a hybrid past. Um, so one of the things being there, one of the herbs that I used while I was there was a herb called shepherd's needle, and it kind of reminded me of. It's kind of a cross. Now, this stuff is everywhere in the Bahamas. I mean, as soon as you walk in grass, you see shepherd's needle growing. I mean, it's basically like a weed, but you know, is growing everywhere, and we use that in place of, like, basically, in my shop I use a lot of parsley, I use a lot of cilantro. So instead of parsley and cilantro, I was using shepherd's needle. So shepherd's needle was I mean, as a herb, the way it tastes, it had like it was intense. It had an intensity to it. It was not. It had a mildness to it, but it had an intensity at the same time. It was definitely like, I mean, you could eat it for sure, and you say, okay, that's interesting. Um, but maybe it was closer to parsley than it was cilantro, and it probably had like somewhat of a dandelion feel to it. So we used the shepherd's needle. There were a few other native herbs that I used that were a little different. And again, from coming from using basil and oregano and parsley, dill, and those kinds of herbs, I just tried to make an equivalent. So this is what, being nature's chef is all about. It's like really connecting with the local food, but the local wild food. It definitely has the most energy. It has the most uh, nutrition. So you cannot go wrong for sure. And it's like the less we have to do as human beings in terms of protecting the food, or growing the food. If it's just growing and you ain't doing nothing, then the food is superior. Because again, if we have to use all of these farming techniques, that really should tell you that it that that it's less than ideal. Can you benefit? Yes, but it's less than ideal. So one of the things that they were into at the New Life was some of the ancient grains, wild rice. So I was able to do, I do wild rice. I've been doing wild rice for some years, and they soak it. It splits. It's basically um, most consider it a seed or straw. So it's really a straw. So when you soak it, it splits. So it's edible, it's chewable, it's tasty. So I showed them a few things what I do with it, and it was a huge hit. Another grain which I don't use and I've been meaning to use, and there's another difference, was the quinoa. So obviously a lot of people are familiar with quinoa. What's amazing about quinoa is even when you cook it, it sprouts. That is like freaking amazing. You can cook it in a pot, and then boom, you look at it and you see the sprout tails on it. It's like, I don't think any that happens with any other grain. So quinoa is definitely a food that I'm looking to introduce at my shop. They have some other grains, obviously some that we are familiar with, like spelt, kamut, but also they had some grains like, now these were grains that they just had for sale. They weren't necessarily using them in a culinary way. They were just offering them because these were grains that apparently, I guess, grow wild in certain parts of the world, like teff. Teff is known in Ethiopian cuisine. Um, the fonio kind of looks like, I think it's from Africa, and it looks like grits to me. But actually, I had meant to bring some back with me. I didn't. And last but not least, other than the grains, is something I'm going to introduce in my shop. They were big on the sea moss. So that's something that actually a number of people come in and say, "Do you have any sea moss?" So actually they gave me a huge supply of that. So um, as early as tomorrow, I'm planning on experimenting and doing some different things with it. So I was able to learn. I was able to be inspired to raise my game. They were certainly inspired to raise their game because basically, everything on their menu. They did have a small deli with a very limited menu, and they were basically preparing their rice and their quinoas like stir fries. So they had a little oven there, and they were just basically just making, throwing some vegetables in there and making a stir fry. So I gave them some ideas. I was happy to do it. I'm happy to bring the raw consciousness or raise the awareness and the education on the on the islands of the Bahamas, and so it was an honor. And and at the same time back here, I'm looking forward to you know eliminating the use of corn. I mean, some of my customers. I mean, most of my customers don't care, but some of my customers, prefer not to eat corn. And of course, because of the high starch content of corn, corn comes out the way it goes in. So that tells you really everything right there. Um, I've been meaning. I'm gonna switch gears here. I've been meaning to make a video about nuts. Nuts have obviously eating a raw vegan diet, coming from whether you're a cooked vegetarian or you're eating, um, animal products, when you move into the raw vegan lifestyle, um, your nut consumption is probably going to increase. So I really wanted to talk about nuts and I guess nuts and seeds, because seeds are really they're different, but there's some more similar than different. So talk a little bit about nuts and seeds. I've been meaning to do a blog on this for the last couple months, but because over the years I've seen some things happen. I wanted to share a little bit what I thought about nuts. Again, there are certain concerns, there are certain benefits, so I just kind of wanted to run through. Now, first and foremost, looking at nuts on the total spectrum of foods. And with the raw vegan diet, we pretty much classify foods in three categories. One category is our fruits, and namely, when we say fruit, we're specifically relying or referring to our sweet fruits. Okay, so our sweet fruits have, usually high moisture. They're usually very eliminative in nature. So these are what I call our foods that are detoxify, that cleanse. These are basically on an acid alkaline scale, they're right in the middle. So, of course, now we're going into summer. First thing on my mind is a watermelon. But all of our, melons, our acid fruits, like our citrus fruits, are next. And then we have our subacid fruits like apples, uh, peaches, pineapples, etc. Okay, so these foods are very eliminative. They're not necessarily nourishing foods. Um, our nuts and seeds are nourishing foods. If you eat nourishing foods, are not eliminative. Nourishing foods are actually, if you eat a lot of nuts and you eat a lot of seeds, they actually will constipate you. So they move a lot slower through the digestive system. are nuts and seeds. Um, and the slower a food moves to, like for example, olive and avocado, same thing. Very nourishing food. These foods have a much higher fat content, and because they're moving slower, it gives the body a chance to really, um, it it satiates the palate, and gives us that full feeling that we're looking for. So and they're not, they move a lot slower through, especially our large intestines. So your bowel movements, if your bowel movements are to the point where you feel constipated, then you're eating too much nuts, too much seeds, too much avocado, too much olives, etc. In the middle is the balance, our green leafy vegetables. They have a nourishing component and they have a eliminative component. A lot of people who are really into, green juices think that our greens are more cleansing than our fruits. That is not the case. They are cleansing, but they are also nourishing. Where our fruits, on the other hand, are more cleansing, definitely more cleansing than your greens. So it's important to know that that's kind of a misconception people have because it's green and it's low in sugar. And it's actually the sugary fruits that are usually the most cleansing foods. So back to our nuts. Our nuts are, you understand now, they are a nourishing food. Now, we don't need to eat, because these foods have a higher concentration, it means that, we should not eat as much of that food, for example, as, say, a watermelon. Like, I can eat a big watermelon, okay, but I can't eat this amount of nuts, okay. Um, so, conventional wisdom is maybe if you're going to eat nuts, and eat nuts like by themselves, no more than a handful. So, yeah, so that's the first thing to really understand about the nuts, is that we should only eat a handful of nuts at any one time. Now, from a culinary perspective, if if you've been to any of my classes, watched any of my videos, I talk about nuts, and the way I use them in a culinary sense is that because I understand where it falls in terms of the whole spectrum of foods that are ideal for human beings, I use them in a way where I'm combining, or my food combining is such that I'm usually combining my nuts, because where you have your fruits are pretty much in the middle in terms of acid alkaline. You got your greens, which are in the middle in terms of nourishing and detoxifying, but those are definitely more or less alkaline. Especially your sea vegetables. Sea vegetables are probably your most alkaline forming foods. And then you have your nuts and seeds, which are usually acidic. Okay, so when I have a recipe, for example, because I understand the acidic nature of nuts, to create balance, I'm bringing in usually a lot of green herbs, usually almost at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I'm using Brazil nuts, I'm using almonds, I'm using pecans, walnuts, whatever the nut is, throwing lots of cilantro, lots of parsley, lots of dill, whatever the herb I feel is a good combination with that particular nut, then I'm usually balancing, and it also balances the flavor. It makes the nut lighter in terms of, it makes it easier to digest. It really complements the nut. Even though nuts typically are sweet tasting. So it tells you that nuts certainly, the fact that nuts versus beans, and that's a good segue because, people ask me, what about beans? nuts are definitely superior to beans, first and foremost. Simply because when you eat nuts, I mean, it tells you, nuts, we don't have to put anything on nuts to enjoy the taste of nuts. Beans, we can't eat beans unless unless they're either ideally sprouted, so soaked and sprouted, or you have to process them. You have to cook them, boil them. So anytime you're boiling, you have to boil something to eat it. You are forcing heat, or you're bringing intense heat, so that it's allowing the water to force its way into this food. It's almost like a force, it's almost like a forced ripening process. And this tells you that a lot of our beans that we eat, if we have to cook them, then they're less ideal to eat. And it really brings it back to soy, because again, soy is one of those things, and very much less than ideal to eat as a food. So nuts are certainly a preference. Now, what about for those people, again, who have the main issue with nuts is people who have food allergies to nuts, and this is a serious concern. Part of the issue, most people have allergies to nuts that are not true to their original form. So, for example, peanuts. Now, if we know anything about peanuts, they have, even now in the raw food world, you can get wild jungle peanuts, and these taste a lot different than the peanuts that you get commercially, from your local grocery store. Whether it's your peanut butter or just your regular peanuts, big differentiation. It's night and day. It doesn't have the it's just night and day. You can Google and find all the information you need. I don't have to go into that. And then things like cashews. I find that different people, you'll have some people who can do cashews. You have some people who can't do Brazil nuts. You have some people who can't do pistachios. I mean, it's really quite interesting. But what I found is that basically, if the body is interesting, because what has happened to most people is, by eating other foods where you would get certain minerals and certain fat, certain protein, like if you're eating things like eggs, fish, other animal products where you're getting, where your body is used to, you're getting that fat and protein. If you stop eating those things, and if you're allergic to nuts and you stop eating those things, it's almost like, in order to compensate for allowing your body to process these foods, your body had to turn off the things that it would need for processing whatever the particular nut is that you may be allergic to. So, for example, if you can't eat walnut, for example, walnuts, are definitely a brain food. I mean, you look at it, it looks like our brain, or really any of the nuts, in because the thing about it is that nuts are certainly without a doubt one of our indigenous foods. If you look into like the apes that are most similar to us, that have 99% genetic structure, they eat nuts and they go hunting for nuts. So that lets you know that nuts are a part of our diet. So we should definitely, if you're allergic to nuts, one thing is that, usually if you can't eat nuts, you usually can get away with eating seeds. So I would say not only, first of all, the first thing is to stop eating whatever, stop, if you want to eat nuts. Now, if you want to do what you are doing now, then don't listen to this. But if you want to include nuts in your diet, it's almost like, you can't have both. Your body has turned off its potential to process whatever the particular nut is, because your body is used to eating, whether it's eggs, fish, or whatever. So basically, if you are in a situation where, a walnut or a Brazil nut or an almond was your only choice for something substantial, something that had fat and protein, your body would turn on what is now turned off, to make a way, to eat that, because it's looking for that oil, it's looking for that protein, it's looking for that density. So that's one thing. One thing is to stop eating the things that is almost blocking the way, for whatever nut that you're allergic to. But really, if you're highly allergic, I would say that the first thing is to eat the seeds, like whatever, the hemp seed, pumpkin seed, sesame seed, those kinds of seeds, and you can use those in place of your nuts, and really sort of prepare your body for the transition into nuts with seeds. And then if there's one particular nut, usually people who are allergic to nuts are not allergic to all of the nuts. So there has to be a little courage. Like some people, if they're allergic to one nut, they won't eat any nuts because they're scared. So if you're in that category, you're going to have to at some point take that risk to say, okay, now here, if you're highly allergic to nuts, this is what you can do. Number one, first and foremost, soak your nuts. So you want to soak whatever your nut is in water, and really one trick you can use is adding food grade hydrogen peroxide to your nuts. The food grade hydrogen peroxide will increase the level of oxygen in the water. That's what hydrogen peroxide is water plus an additional oxygen molecule. So it will increase the oxygen in the water, and therefore make that particular nut more digestible. Again, that was something that was shared with me some years back by someone who was allergic to nuts, but found that if the water used had added food grade hydrogen peroxide, then there was no reaction. So that is one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is, again, I mentioned adding, one particular nut. So once you add the one particular nut, it's like, you find probably the safest nut for most people is, I would say, the almond. And again, almonds will absorb a lot of water. They almost double in size from when they're dried and when they're soaked. So you can start with the almond if you're not doing any nuts. Pecans and walnuts are also very soft, and you can also, use those. I find that Brazil nuts are pretty intense. A lot of oil in Brazil nuts, and they're pretty dense as well. So that's something you may want to work up to, the Brazil nut. Now, another thing you can do, now if you're having a reaction to nuts. One of my former employees had like used to get nut reactions, and one of the things, like sometimes it was not even. I mean, he almost didn't even have to eat the nut if he was around it and he smelt it, or it wasn't all the time, but if he smelt it, then he would have a reaction. His eyes would swell up, it would get watery, he would start begin to sneeze constantly. So one of the things that you can do in terms of um, sort of as a like a safety net is to have one thing we used to give him is a shot of Swedish or shot of bitters. We used to use the Swedish bitters. So it's basically one of those supplements you would get from your local health food store. There's one. It's actually called Swedish bitters, but any bitters would work. It would. Usually in a dark bottle, and it's something that again, probably because of the alkalinity, and just really balancing, what the herbs, what the nut has done. So it just sort of can just like again, you know, I don't know what a nut allergy is like, but I've seen it and it kind of like brings them out, like kind of like you know, like it's because it's almost like the nut is like working definitely hard on their immune system and bringing them down, and it's like those bitters will kind of bring you back to life. So that's one thing. If you have a nut allergy, you almost want to have by your side, just in case. Okay. So so again, if I mean, obviously, of course, if it's all good for you with nuts, then it's something. Then this may be a wake up call if you're not eating nuts to definitely include nuts in your diet, but in a balanced way. If you're making like nut pates, you want to add a lot of fresh herbs. My favorite is parsley and cilantro, and with my cashews, I usually use dill because I'm usually making like a cream or a sauce with that. Um, but because our nuts are nourishing foods, they're high in minerals, high in potassium, um, just high in the in those minerals that we are deficient in. So when we combine our nuts with our green leafy vegetables, we're really getting a basically almost like a complete foundation of minerals, vitamins, nutrients in a balanced way. Because we got to think about the minerals, we got to think about the acid alkaline balance, and so nuts are a very important food. This video I wanted to talk about nuts because again, I think nuts get a bad rap, but nuts are definitely our food. We want to, if you have a nut allergy, basically from what I share with you in this video, you can overcome your nut allergy. It's not a death sentence. And so, again, nuts is definitely where it's at. I'll finish this video. One thing some while back is, because as men, we want to, usually as men we want to eat foods. Women are usually definitely more in tune with the health because, health and beauty is, like sister to sister. It's like, women, and I also think just innately because they understand in terms of the survival of the species innately, almost on a subconscious level. Women have to understand because they're carrying, are the next generation, that they have to be more in tune. They have to be more in line with the health of with their health. But also, women, strong motivating factor for women is maintaining their beauty, natural beauty. Whereas men, we're more interested in our sexual vitality. You know, one brother had asked me some time back is, you know, how do we feed, uh, our nuts and seeds? And I said, with nuts and seeds. So, yeah, or no, it went like, we feed our nuts and seeds. We feed our nuts and seeds, or we feed. I messed up the joke, but anyway, I think you get the point. You know, nuts and seeds feed our nuts and seeds. Okay, there it is. And basically, so it's definitely in terms of vitality, and anything that raises us sexually, it raises our vitality. Because sexuality is a measure of health. The more healthy we are, the more sexy we are, and it's not only an appeal, but in terms of fertility, in terms of fertility. Fertility, high fertility means high vitality. Okay, so nuts and seeds feed fertility. They feed vitality. Okay, so when we recognize the balance, again, we should not eat nuts and seeds all the time. We don't want to OD on the nuts, but when we combine it in a smart way with fruits, vegetables, and then our nuts and seeds, along with the sprouted grains, indigenous grains, wild rice, quinoa, things like that, aromath. These are that is the true gateway to high health, high vitality, high sexuality. It all goes together. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a lot out of it. I actually enjoyed making it. Um, so yes, so subscribe, continue to look out for future videos, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of it. Peace, one love.